This is Hull, home to one of the 20th century's greatest British poets, Philip Larkin. Larkin was one of the writers that got me into poetry. I could see what he was on about. But he wasn't only an outstanding writer, he was also a gifted photographer who charted his life in pictures. And he was addicted to taking selfies. Larkin took thousands of pictures of people and places as well as himself, and all of them are stored here in this building. It's a remarkable archive, and many of the pictures that I'm going to look at today have never been seen before in public. There are 5,000 photographs stored here, from Larkin's childhood until his death. There are pictures of other writers, his close friend Kingsley Amis, as well as Larkin's greatest poetic rival, Ted Hughes. But much of the archive is surprisingly intimate. To be honest, I'm fascinated, but a little uneasy. These were made for public consumption, but made for the same mix of reasons that we all take snapshots. Mainly the fear of losing the moment, of forgetting and being forgotten. What strikes me about the best of these photographs is the care he took, his neatness, his sense of detail, qualities we find in his poems. And alongside the photographs, there are some surprising personal details. In amongst the literary great and the good, what do we have but Larkin's measurements for his pyjamas? Your inside trouser leg measurement, 29 inches, same as me.
He's, I think, a great photographer, but he's even better than a great photographer because of the interaction between the poems and the photographs.
The photographs he took do tell you about his life. Some of them are just snaps, but even when they're snaps, they have a life and a vitality about them which some people's photographs never manage to have.
Philip Larkin was born in 1922 in Coventry. Despite his later famous lines about how your mum and dad can mess you up, it was a comfortable upbringing. His father had a baby Brownie camera and encouraged his son to take up photography as a hobby. For the rest of his life, Larkin kept a camera close by his side.
He is unique because no one else in the history of literature has ever been so preoccupied both with photography and with poetry.
Is there another poet or another artist, another musician who's done that in the 20th century?
It's hard to think of another writer of Larkin's quality who's left behind such a rich visual archive of their daily life. But from the start, I think we need to be careful about deciding how much this tells us about Larkin and his work. A photograph is not a poem. Larkin arrived in Hull as head librarian of the university in 1955. Around him, he could capture images of a city which was still shaped by post-war austerity and bomb damage. It's a world which, more than 60 years later, has largely changed beyond recognition.
There are craters, there are cranes, there are dockside views. There are lots of quotes where he seems to dislike Hull. But when he photographed it, there's a sort of curious, despondent beauty about the place.
When I first came here, I could park my car outside that library.
At Hull University, Larkin was in charge of building a new library. His secretary was Betty Macaruth. Today, we're visiting their old offices. Larkin recorded the building work on camera. He'd be hard-pressed to recognise the library today. Betty's coming back to where she used to work. The office has been preserved, and Larkin's old desk is still here. Wow.
Yes.
So would you sometimes sit in front of this little fire and warm yourselves up?
No. We worked.
Yeah. Betty was 21 when she started working for Larkin. Sometimes he surprised her with his camera.
There's the photograph of me looking at him when we were smiling.
What do you remember of Philip taking photographs in this room?
Well, I mean, I was absolutely amazed at the photographs of me that he'd taken.
And he took them in here, didn't
Well,
he?
he took them in here, or I was at my desk in there.
So you would be busy at work and he'd say, Betty, can I take your photograph?
No, he would just come in and take it. I didn't know about it, you see.
You didn't know about it?
But now I do know, and I think what a good job I behaved myself all the time.
Right.
You wouldn't find me picking my nose or anything like that.
To Betty, her new boss seemed lonely as he tried to settle in.
I don't know whether he enjoyed it or not. It was difficult to tell what he did enjoy.
By now, Larkin had splashed out on a new top-of-the-range German camera.
This isn't Larkin's own camera, but it's very like the one he did own. It's a Rolleiflex, which is one of the great camera designs of the 20th century, and he bought his in 1957, so it's really good professional quality kit.
And would you one put it on and wear it?
Yes, you could do
Like
that.
so?
Yes, it's used about chest height. So a lot of really important photographers like Lee Miller in the Second World War,
Yeah.
Brassai in Paris in the 30s, Bill Brandt in
Right.
London in the Blitz, they all used this
Gosh,
camera.
so it was a real portable, action-ready camera.
Yeah.
He bought it second-hand and refused to tell his mother how much he'd paid for it. This was the camera that Larkin kept for the rest of his life. What are the possibilities of a camera like this? Does it have a sort of zoom lens effect?
It doesn't have any of those fancy lenses, but the negative is big enough for you to crop in details. So it's an all-round camera, so it's good for portraits, it's good for street life, it's good for landscapes. It's a really good all-round camera.
For Larkin, the area around his new home was an unknown country, and he started to explore. Just outside Hull lie rolling countryside, muddy estuaries and open water. It was a new world waiting to be discovered.
Beyond her domes and cranes, enormous skies of gold and shadows build, a filigree of wharves and wires, ricks and refineries. Her working skyline wanders to the sea.
In the 1960s, Larkin came to this station and the villages nearby to take photographs. Some of it has changed almost completely. But some things are pretty much the same.
Wind-muscled wheat fields wash round villages, their churches half submerged in leaf, that lie drowned in high summer, cartways and cottages, the soft, huge haze of ash-blue sea close by.
Here we get a feel for the kind of landscape that inspired Larkin. He says it's forgotten, drowned, ash blue. Maybe that says as much about Larkin as it does about the place itself. Larkin loved this kind of solitude. I'm following his route, trying to find some of the same places.
This very lonely, strange Humber landscape, which is really like the back of beyond. He discovered this and was entranced by it.
In a village graveyard, I think I've discovered one of the same spots he came to all those years ago. It's only when you take a photograph that you realise how complicated it was. This was a different era, and Larkin's Rolleiflex was a specialist piece of kit. Some of his photographs are easy to match. But other locations, captured on a sunny day 50 years ago, have been lost in the changes caused by passing time. Larkin's poetic inspiration can be hard to pin down, but a few of his poems can be directly linked to photographs. Show Saturday describes a country show which Larkin visited in Northumberland.
Grey day for the show, but cars jam the narrow lanes. Inside, on the field, judging has started.
There's this peculiar type of Northumbrian wrestling where these two people, they were brothers, I think, and they put on white leotards and they wrestled statically, and the aim was for one of them to push the other's shoulders onto the ground.
The wrestling starts late. A wide ring of people, then cars, then trees, then pale sky.
And the photographs he took, sometimes from quite a distance, of them in their white overall garments, as it were, are very evocative.
Two young men in acrobats' tights and embroidered trunks hug each other, rock over the grass stiff-legged in a two-man scrum.
When you read the poem, that is a really strange, surreal section, and he's got it to a T.
Another Larkin poem, The Mower, describes the unfortunate fate of a hedgehog which may or may not have been the same one he photographed beneath his own underwear in his back garden.
The mower stalled twice. Kneeling, I found a hedgehog jammed up against the blades, killed. I had seen it before and even fed it once. Now I had mauled its unobtrusive world unmendably.
The poem is tear-jerkingly tragic. You feel that he'd had difficulty putting as much emotion into this as you would a poem about a human being who died.
We should be careful of each other. We should be kind, while there is still time.
This little creature has probably won itself a place in the history of literary photography and paid a high price to get there, but experts aren't ready to say for sure.
Obviously, it was the fact that the hedgehog had come and he'd fed it which gave him the emotional sort of power behind the poem. But it doesn't really matter, does it? Hedgehog's just a hedgehog, they're generic.
Larkin's status as a poet is unchallenged, but as a photographer, his output was varied, from simple snaps to something more substantial.
I think we have to say that if he hadn't been a great poet, we would not really be looking at his photographs in great depth. But because they feed into his poetry so well, they're really important. He was not just an amateur, but to me he was a gifted amateur. And sometimes he was on really good form, and sometimes he was on holiday.
I mean, I really like this photograph. It may not compositionally be as exciting as that one, but it's got the information in it is really moving.
I agree. It's a second-hand clothes shop, I suppose, and it's got these bargain basement prices, and they're all written in rather bad spelling. I feel it's one of his very best photographs, and if you put it up against documentary photographs by other people from the 1950s, I think it would come out pretty near the top.
In his photography, Larkin looked at himself as well as the world around him. He was recording a life in photographs, and he became a pioneer of the selfie when it was a hard picture to take.
He had a self-timer on his Rolleiflex camera, so he could set the self-timer. He'd have about 10 seconds to assume his pose, so he can pick up his big teacup and get the paper and so on and sit down, and then click.
He put the camera in a position and posed for it, and as one always does in these cases, one slices the top of one's head off.
Very often in these self-images, these selfies if you like, we feel that there's a certain amount of intimacy. We feel that this is the real Larkin. But the more we look, the offer of intimacy is withdrawn. He looks strangely enigmatic suddenly.
At first, Larkin had said Hull was a dreary place, but he changed his mind. For 18 years, he lived in a flat here overlooking Pearson Park. He's got an unwarranted reputation as a man who didn't particularly like people. But for all his faults, look closer and you'll find a warmth, a sense of fun, and a gift for loyalty and friendship. It's there in the photographs. Larkin's mother, Eva, was widowed in 1948. He was always a dutiful, loving son.
He is dedicated to her and can't ever not be, but there is a tremendous ambiguity about it. It's a lifelong duty.
Did you like the photographs? I think I might get myself an enlargement. Is there anyone you like? Perhaps you think they're awful. I like number 6 very much, though. It shows you as the dear old creature you are.
There's a lovely one he took from an upstairs bedroom window, where he's obviously posed her, knowing the effect, standing in the middle of the lawn, and then behind her there's a wall, and behind her there's a field. And there she is standing, this elderly woman, looking up at the photograph being taken of her. It has tremendous pathos and also real sympathy about it.
Apart from his mother, there was another woman at the centre of Larkin's life, Monica Jones, whom he'd met at Leicester when she was a lecturer in English. He took hundreds of photographs of her, and she helped him take some of his own self-portraits. But they spent most of their time apart, and they were never married.
With her, you can see a lot of variants. There are the early ones, one or two of which are really the equivalent of society portraits, where he's trying to make her look very glamorous, and she does look very glamorous because she obviously was something of a stunner.
It was the most intense, romantic relationship of Larkin's life, and some of that emerges in his photographs.
She's sitting in an armchair with striped tights on, and those alongside the ones where he photographs her in his offices in Hull, where you notice that there's no one else there. There's a sense in which he's locked the door. Yeah, there's a degree of eroticism there. But again, that's an accurate reflection of their relationship.
This is Larkin's flat at Pearson Park. Oh, it's great to see you.
Here we are. Here's the house.
I'm meeting John Osborne, who's researched Larkin's photographs. Wow.
Look at the windows.
Yes, the high
Fantastic.
windows.
Yeah, it looks amazing, doesn't it?
It does. This is where Larkin wrote some of his greatest poetry and took some of his most personal photographs of Monica. To me, a number of these pictures seem so private and intimate, it sometimes feels an intrusion to look at them.
One of the things that I think is striking in a picture like this is how infrequently she's smiling. I think even in this one, she looks a bit like a startled rabbit. But I think you can also see that there is something wrong in the relationship, even when she's posing at her most glamorous. It's not smiling, it's not enticing, it's not seductive. I do feel that the photographs and the poems about Monica suggest a kind of love riddled with constraints, which were sometimes the constraints of the time, sometimes the constraints of their personalities.
What was it that kept them apart?
Larkin is the short answer. So there is within the relationship an insufficiently compelling element for Larkin to think, you spring me from my neuroses into a realm of real happiness.
Despite the flaws in their relationship, this was the closest Larkin ever came to love. But without naming Monica, he was brutally honest about her in his poetry.
Talking in bed ought to be easiest. Lying together there goes back so far, an emblem of two people being honest. Nothing shows why, at this unique distance from isolation, it becomes still more difficult to find words at once true and kind, or not untrue and not unkind.
At the library, Larkin's secretary Betty could see her boss's life was getting more complicated. Larkin had formed a relationship with a colleague, Maeve Brennan.
That's Maeve. She was a bit mamby-pamby, yes. I couldn't have made a friend of her. She was a pest. She fawned on him. She was always there. She was a flaming nuisance.
Betty and Maeve didn't hit it off, but Larkin was smitten. His photographs of Maeve suggest an uncomplicated companionship with an occasional hint of something more.
There's one very striking photograph of Maeve where he catches her behind some very long 6 feet high grasses, and he makes her look enigmatic, almost glamorous, as if she's an extra from a French film of the 1950s.
Those photographs all have a certain distance. There are 2 or 3 photographs of her sitting on a sofa and looking over her shoulder. Some of them, they're glamour photographs in a way, but they're more discreet and they're more decorous because of her personality. She was a rigid Catholic and they didn't have sex for 25 years. No, 15 years.
In photographs, Larkin and his secretary Betty shared conventional working roles, but Betty's relationship with her boss was about to get closer.
He stopped outside my house and he said, "Well, aren't you going to invite me in?" So I said, "Well, yes, all right, you know." Well, I mean, we just sat and we talked and that, and then he moved up a bit closer and a bit... and, I mean, damn it, I'd been with him for, I suppose, 25 years then, and he'd never made a move before.
The change in Larkin's relationship with Betty inspired him to write one of his most beautiful and ambiguous love poems.
Morning at last, there in the snow, your small, blunt footprints come and go. Night has left no more to show, not the candle, the half-drunk wine, or touching joy, only this sign of your life walking into mine.
Who was that, Wordsworth?
He wrote it for you, didn't he?
Yes.
It was an affair in middle age. Larkin's photographs show a couple who were comfortable in each other's company.
Oh, it was lovely. And we just used to have these days out. But there were no petting, no nothing. I mean, he was just having a day out and with somebody who knew Yorkshire, somebody who could, you know, tell him about things. I could never have married him if he'd come to that. But we got on well together.
For Larkin, photography was a lifelong passion. But he only wrote one poem about it, which described the camera's limitations as well as its emotional power.
But oh, photography as no art is, faithful and disappointing, that records dull days as dull and hold its smiles as frauds.
Larkin uses this poem to say that despite photography's limits, it can see through pretense and transform the moment into an image whose meaning changes through time. This is the album that inspired the poem. It belonged to his close friend Winifred Arnott. As a young man, Larkin had fallen for Winifred. In his poem, he writes about how he'd stolen a look at her album of photographs, which is now kept here in Hull.
So I am left to mourn, without a chance of consequence, you, balanced on a bike against a fence, to wonder if you'd spot the theft of this one, of you bathing.
It starts off by saying on the surface that photography is empirically true and disappointing, and it actually ends up by saying that the photograph is like a sonnet by Shakespeare, something which will last as long as men have ears to hear or eyes to see.
I think it's fair to say that in some of his best photography, as well as in a surprising number of his poems, Larkin was inspired by emotions which, if they weren't love itself, were love denied. What he finds are moments in time which would otherwise be lost. Many of his own photographs, most movingly his photographs of the women who were near to him, have turned to images about the effects of time itself.
To condense, in short, a past that no one now can share, no matter whose your future, calm and dry, it holds you like a heaven, and you lie unvariably lovely there, smaller and clearer as the years go by.
By now, Larkin was getting older. There was less poetry and fewer photographs. He feared he was burnt out.
There's only the moment. Life is only a moment long. And he gets it into the photographs as much as he gets it into some of his greatest poems.
I work all day and get half drunk at night. Waking at 4 to soundless dark, I stare. In time, the curtain edges will grow light. Till then, I see what's really always there. Unresting death, a whole day nearer now, making all thought impossible, but how and where and when I shall myself die.
On his own modest level, there is a kind of Rembrandt-esque sequence of photographs of himself through all the ages that he went through, and you can line them up, and they do make quite a moving effect.
Larkin's camera caught moments of his own life, but he couldn't conquer his greatest fear, the approach of death. In Larkin's very best selfies, he gazes into the lens with the same intensity and brave honesty that we find in his very best poems. It's as though he stares at time itself, to the edge of vision. The shutter clicks, the moment ends, and he's one step closer to death.
And so it stays, just on the edge of vision, a small, unfocused blur, a standing chill that slows each impulse down to indecision. Most things may never happen. This one will.
For Larkin, the inevitable happened, the final moment, in 1985. He died of cancer, aged 63.
He said to me, not many hours before he died, Maeve came to see me. I didn't want to see Maeve. I wanted to see Monica to tell her I loved her. And I felt like saying, you stupid man, why the hell didn't you marry her years ago? She was everything.
Larkin took more photographs of his lifelong companion Monica than of any other living person. Probably he never imagined any of these images would go on public display. But to me, there's a desire for love on show here which echoes the subject of one of his greatest poems.
Time has transformed them into untruth. The stone fidelity they hardly meant has come to be their final blazon, and to prove our almost instinct, almost true. What will survive of us is love.